from the Cheyenne Tribune and asked him point blank, "Are you wet or are you dry?" And Dad's response was, "Madam, if I were any more wet, if you blew on me, I'd ripple." which which also led to another story. Can you stand this? The old, yeah, okay. Well, when he got back, while he was in the legislature, the legislative body, the legislators in the legislators in the House of Representatives had put together a bill called the Still Bill, which Dad maintained would make a criminal out of every housewife trying to draw bath water. He thought it was an absolute crime. So he made a brag that if he couldn't defend anybody if they got indicted on the Still Bill, if he couldn't defend them and get them off the hook, he'd give their money back. And when he got back to Thermopolis, right there on the deck of the railroad station was the local established bootlegger, Sharky Swain. What a name. And Sharky Swain had a paper in his hand. He says, "Okay, kid, make good your brag. I just got indicted under the Still Bill." And Dad went to work. He was officing with his dad up in the old Clink building, which is still there in Thermopolis. And he worked his tail off, and he got him off. And when Sharky came in to settle for the victory, Dad screwed up his courage, and when he asked what the charge would be, and he said $350, which was a lot of money in that day. And Dad's office was right across from a dentist and right next to an accountant's office, and Sharky had a Palm Beach suit on, and he reached into his pocket, dragged out a roll of bills that just about choke a horse, and he started counting them off. And just as he was counting them off, the dentist across the aisle must have hit a nerve, and this woman screamed bloody murder, and Sharky never stopped counting. He says, "That a lawyer's office too?" Okay. Well, look, it's we are in an amazing state. Well, here, the small aside too. Our youngest son has, many of you may know, has had a very successful acting theater career in New York City as one of the original Blue Men in the Blue Man Group, which is a pretty notable downtown show. And he won an Obie Award for 20 years of performance excellence for that and several other things he'd been in. And he got into a car with his 2 children and his wife 3.5 months ago and drove to Wyoming, right in the middle of the COVID attack on New York City, because the Blue Man Group, the shows, Broadway, everything was closed. His wife is a school teacher. There's no school. So they came out here, and they're living out up on the ranch right now for what we used to say in World War II was the duration. You remember that phrase? You're in it for the duration. So he doesn't know what the next step will be. But is he ever grateful, as is his wife, to be in Wyoming, the equality state, and the cowboy state? He is, his children are blossoming. They no longer have just a square little courtyard at 3 floors down in a cubicle of apartments. They've got the whole wide open South Fork to play in, and they've absolutely taken on a new life. It's been wonderful. But Mary, you had your...
I actually do have a question.
All right.
And I was just
See if I can
curious,
answer.
you were talking about all the energy and enthusiasm around 1869, 1870, 1871 for equal rights, and I'm just wondering if that's gone in waves, and if there have been other sort of waves of enthusiasm for equality between the sexes in our state at different times, like beyond that, or was that pretty much the time that we carved out that kind of energy?
I think pretty much that time, and Al Larson actually contends that. And I think one of the reasons, and something that we can see visibly, is it is truly, to a great extent, a man's economy in this state. If you're over in Gillette, you're in the mines. If you're in the prairie parts of Wyoming, you're in ranching. At least historically, I know things change, but how many times have we heard the conversation, we need to diversify. We need to get out from under the, thank you very much.
I wasn't sure what to do with it.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thank you. And so not much. And I think possibly because, you know, the odds at the time in 1869 were 6 to 1, 6 men between 25 and 50 to every woman up to that same age. So that's like one of Al's staff went to Alaska because she said, I can't find a good man in Washington, D.C., and the odds are good in Alaska. And when she came back, Al asked her, well, how did that go? And she said, well, the odds were good, but the goods were odd. So, yes.
Though it is surprising how many women own businesses in Cody, Wyoming.
That's of interest. Heaven's sake.
And
From,
I think that would be an interesting thing to survey in every small town in Wyoming.
if you didn't hear that, Ann says how many women own businesses in this small town and how many own businesses in small towns in Wyoming. I will refer any of us interested in that sort of statistic. The Office of Workforce Services in Cheyenne is very, very accommodating. They have statistical information that goes on. Well, you have some examples of it there, and they're very willing to share it. I might just ask that question, and, see how many, because I'm throughout the whole state. I wouldn't be surprised that those statistics are available. Warren.
As I recall, in T.A. Larson's original book, he gets into describing the cowboy in Wyoming, and it wasn't very attractive. These are people you don't want your daughters to marry. These are disreputable people, and the cowboy originally had a bad image.
Somebody said that 1936, under Leslie Miller, Governor Leslie Miller, when the cowboy was implanted on the license plate, the first time, by the way, an imprint of a picture of some kind was placed on a license. And of course, it's become iconic in the country now. But what they tended to say was it was a good time to do that because the 1880s and early 1890s, a cowboy was largely gone. He had disappeared. So that the memories and the image and the cowboys of cowboy movies in the 1930s became much more accessible and much more desirable, and therefore as Al Larson said, he says, other states have a right to claim the cowboy image, but the state that wrote the script of the myth was Wyoming. And that, of course, refers to Owen Wister and the Virginian and Shane and all of the locale things that were written about cowboys in Wyoming. So did I answer that?
Yeah, we did really build that image up, but now it's sort of almost an entertainment thing rather than a real thing. And I remember a good friend of mine who's a big rancher in the state told me a few years ago, you can't find real cowboys anymore because the work is too hard. And where they're getting them from is Bolivia, Peru, and ideally Mexico, where the best cowboys come.
It's very interesting. Even Gretel Ehrlich, in a wonderful book that I think you, both ladies and men, would enjoy, called The Solace of Open Spaces, really a beautifully written book. She has a description of a cowboy as a pile of rocks. He's snowed on, he's kicked by horses, he's peed on, and he's treated like nothing. because that's what he was. He was a transient, and
And he was fortunate if he fell in love with a school teacher and married.
that's right. That's right. There's many in eastern, particularly over in the Sheridan country, Eaton's Dude Ranch. Many a prim eastern girl found Sheridan cowboys attractive, and some of those marriages lasted for years. Some of them lasted for weeks. Anyhow.
Tell us about the announcement party, because the old man was quite a character, when he came up on the screen.
Well, part of the pleasure and fun of going through these boxes is to find things related to the family history that sometimes you tend to forget, and sometimes you wish you had forgotten it. But this one was priceless, which is a movie, 16 millimeter movie. Dad was a lawyer in Thermopolis, and he had met this attractive girl in Sheridan who was the daughter of a coal mine owner, Peter Coy, Lorna, and for 3 years he tried to press his suit to get her to say yes. In fact, he actually met her 2 years up on the mountain, and he plied his plea, and he said, "Son, my ears were stopped up," and I think she said yes. If I'd heard that, you'd be a year older today. and yeah, Dad was then finally accepted by the family before Mom accepted him. And he charmed them, but he couldn't charm Mom until quite late in the business. And so they planned a giant wedding out in the big lawn of the Sheridan house. It's still there, that big lawn in the house, with Chinese lanterns and a big announcement of the engagement of Lorna Coy to this Thermopolis lawyer. And in the movie, all the guests had gathered around in the lawn. Beautiful night. And peeking through the fence, by the way, it was Martha Close, who later married Cliff Hansen. Martha Hansen. She was just a little girl in Sheridan. Anyhow, so the movie began with Mr. and Mrs. Peter Coy, and here's a film of Peter and Mary Coy, and they're God knows where, Rio de Janeiro or something. They look fancy. Things announced the engagement of their daughter, Lorna Helen, and here's a beautiful movie snippet of Mom in some flowing gown, looking young and exotic and exciting. To, and then there was a space, Millward Lee Simpson, and some woman shouted, "Not him!" And it was the wife of the local editor, Watt Brandon. It was Mrs. Brandon, who lived just catty corner across the way and was cantankerous ornery lady. Dad, and this has a follow-up, which is just terrible. Dad is driving up Laux Avenue and then up the hill toward the family home there in Sheridan, and in the early morning, and somehow Mrs. Brandon on the second floor window had gotten out on the roof to clear some leaves and had locked herself out of the window, and she was in a nightgown and a robe, and Dad saw her up there, and he stopped the car and he honked the horn and said, "Mrs. Brandon, can I be of any help?" Honk, honk, honk. "Mrs. Brandon, could I help you out?" And it was so embarrassing for her. He was taking relish and she was taking umbrage. Anyhow, well, look at this has gone on and on, but I've sure enjoyed it. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me. Thank you, Dave, for carrying me, and thank you, Lynn, for feeding me that peanut butter sandwich. And I'm glad to see you. Hang in there. It's a crazy time.